Welcome back to Boiler Wild. My name is Eric Johnson. On this podcast, talk about boilers and personal development, all kinds of fun stuff. Boilers are fun, steam is fun, water is fun, chemistry is fun. So is personal development. You should want to grow in your career. Big believer in personal development, reading books, exercising, and helping others. The title of the podcast, Boiler Wild. Wild is an acronym. WILD stands for work hard, invest in yourself, lead others, and develop yourself into a person of excellence. So you should always strive to be better, 1% better every single day. And over a lifetime, you will make leaps and bounds. So that is the goal. I am not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but some action is better than a perfect plan. So that's what I try to do every day. And most days I am successful, but some days, I tell you what, I barely want to roll out of bed. It is tough out there some days. But I want to talk about training and getting results. So I had a conversation with a student that took the Foundations of Controls and Safety Devices course today. And well, they didn't take it today. They had completed it, but I talked to them today on the phone. And we were just going over some specifics of stuff that they were unclear about, and which is super helpful. That's a benefit. If you don't have somebody to guide you, I am here for you. Like, you can message me, email me, call me, and we can talk through it. Talk to CSD1, any questions you have and specifics. That is part of what you are getting with the course. Don't feel like you are just buying a course and you are stuck on an island. It's all about support and learning. I am trying to figure out how to do like live office hours. I don't know. I know it'd be valuable, but if I show up every day on a live, I don't know, even like something general like YouTube Live where anybody could log in. If I show up once a week for an hour or two, would anybody else show up? I don't know, but kicking that around. But if you have taken the course, if you have questions, I try to talk to every student and get feedback and answer any questions. But was talking to them today, and part of the CSD1 form, when you are filling it out, is the safety relief valve section. So on the form, there is safety relief valve information, how many valves, and manufacturer, capacity, set point. And we were talking about capacity, and they had recently found, when they were filling out a form, a capacity issue with a newer boiler that was installed within the last year. And the issue, so first of all, capacity, if you don't know, so on a safety relief valve, capacity, if you have multiple valves, capacity is all the valves capacities added up has to be equal to or greater than the boiler rated capacity. Typically, it's going to be greater than. Typically, if you have like 3 safety relief valves, the capacity of each valve is not going to equal the boiler capacity. If you only had 1 valve, but typically you just have 3 valves and the capacity is going to be a little bit greater, maybe 10 or 20% greater than the boiler capacity. And that's fine. But they looked at the valve tags and they added up the capacity, and it was 4,000 pounds an hour. And the boiler was marked on the tag at 5,000 pounds an hour. So obviously there's an issue. If you have multiple valves and the capacity of the valves are not greater than the boiler data tag, you have an issue. And seeing that the boiler was installed within the last year or two, you have to reach out to the manufacturer, one, and then you go, all right, so what's wrong here? Because you have the original valves that shipped with the boiler, and what ended up happening is the manufacturer just wrote down the wrong capacity information on the data plate of the boiler. And by wrote down, they engraved the wrong information. But that is a mistake. And, according to CSD1, the manufacturer should have caught that when they filled out their CSD1 form for the boiler before it left the factory. But they didn't. And then when every new boiler is started, a state or insurance inspector shows up and they look at the boiler, and it should have been caught then, but it wasn't. And now this contractor shows up and does a CSD1 and catches it. So it ended up being not a huge deal. You just get a new data plate and away you go. If the relief valves were actually undersized, that would have been a way bigger deal. Obviously, because somebody screwed up the relief valves, and then you would have probably had to redo the exit piping, and there's a lot of money involved in that. But in this case, it is just a misprint on the data tag. But that is something that shouldn't, never happen. The manufacturer should have caught that, but manufacturers are humans. Once you understand that, and that boiler manufacturers don't have the highest of quality control, like boiler manufacturers do pretty low volume of manufacturing compared to like automotive manufacturing like Ford or Chevrolet. So Ford, if they just had some willy-nilly quality standards, they would have wild issues with their cars. And you might say, oh, well, Ford sucks. Well, Ford makes millions of cars, and they'll have issues with a small percentage of them. But, imagine sticking a sticker on the, an F-150, and it's supposed to be, some other car, and where you stick the wrong gross vehicle weight sticker on it. But you got to have checks and checks on top of those checks, because everybody's human, and if you don't have systems around it. But whatever, it left the manufacturer. The state inspector should have caught it. State inspector didn't catch it. And that is why it is so important with the CSD1 to not assume it is correct. I preach this in the course. I preach this about everything. You should always go into the boiler room, never assuming that everything's correct and you're just there to pencil whip and push paper and fill out a dumb form and be on your way. You catch dumb stuff like this, like a wrong data tag capacity, and while it's a minor issue, what if somebody catches that 10 years down the road? And now you have 10 years of CSD1 reports that are all wrong. If you would look at the first page of the CSD1 report, it would say the boiler steam capacity, input capacity is 5 million BTUs per hour, and the output capacity is 4 million. The input capacity is 5 million BTUs per hour, and then the total safety relief valve capacity is 4 million BTUs per hour. What if you fill out a bunch of those forms year over year, and Then somebody else comes along and goes, hey, this is wrong. Like, are you really filling out a CSD1? Are you really checking? Or are you just writing numbers on a piece of paper and just going, yep, everything works. Yep. And that's why you have to have a mindset of, I need to find problems. It's wrong until I verify it. All right, the boiler manufacturer. I'm going to write down the manufacturers. All right, the MAWP. Let me find the MAWP of the boiler. Let me find it on the actual pressure vessel. I'm not going to rely on the manufacturer's data tag that they printed up and stuck on the front of the boiler. I want to find it on the actual pressure vessel and verify it that it is correct with the data tag on the front of the boiler. Because think about it. The manufacturer could have a pressure vessel, and once again, manufacturers are humans. They could have a pressure vessel and they could screw up and attach the wrong printed data plate to the front of the boiler, and everybody goes off that one because they're too lazy to remove a cover and some insulation to view the data that's either stamped into the pressure vessel or is stamped on like a plate and permanently attached to the pressure vessel. It'll depend on if it's like a water tube boiler or a fire tube boiler, where it's at. If it's a horizontal fire tube boiler, like a Scotch Marine, or a vertical fire tube boiler, it differs where it needs to be at, but it'll be permanently attached to the pressure vessel or stamped in the pressure vessel. But that is the reason why you, one, can't copy old forms. If you just say, oh, we've done CSD1 forms for the last 8 years, everything's correct, let me just copy this information and then I'll check a couple safeties. Yep, everything's good. You are not doing it justice, and you are not representing what a qualified individual is per CSD1. Being a qualified individual, basically it's a defined term by CSD1, and it's basically somebody who is a boiler professional, and as a boiler professional, you have to be familiar with the manufacturer's equipment and procedures. So there is a high standard, and I know there are contractors out there that just pencil whip CSD1s. I've seen it. But you have to hold yourself to a higher standard. Everybody will pencil whip the CSD1 until a boiler melts down or blows up. And then all of a sudden, when people start scrutinizing the forms, you don't want to have errors on there. You don't want to have to try to explain why you copied information for years and years and years that was wrong. Why did you put that on the report? I don't know, because I copied the old one. Like, there would be no reason why information should be wrong between reports year over year if it's not the same information that you should be getting from the boiler. Because if you are starting fresh, you should be verifying and getting the information off the boiler, not off an old report. And I think there are a lot of contractors, and even as a whole, a contractor has the mechanical license and posts online how amazing they are and everything. It really boils down to the individual and how much they care. One individual that works for that contractor could be a rock star and does CSD1 correctly, and another individual could be the one that just pencil whips it and just whatever and goes on with their day. But in both scenarios, they both work for the same company, and you can't say, oh, like, we always do it correctly. It's on the company leadership to make sure that the reports are getting done correctly, that safeties are being tested correctly, that everybody in the company is doing everything the same. Even though all boilers are generally different, they're all generally the same. And you should be testing safeties the same way. And if you ask 10 people in your company, 10 field people, hey, how do we do a CSC1 report? You should all get a similar response on the same boiler. Hey, this is the company procedure. Hey, when we do a primary low water cutoff test, how are we testing it? Are we just blowing it down, or are we doing an evaporation test? When we test the secondary low water cutoff, what are we looking for? Are we just blowing it down? What if it's a probe? What are we looking for? Do we inspect the probe wires? Do we do an evaporation test? Are we making sure the manual reset works? If it's a float style, are we making sure that the housing and wiring inside the float is good and that there's no leaks? Typically, a float style will be a McDowell Miller, and you can get leaks depending on what kind of float, but you can get leaks in the housing from the bellows. Like, what are you doing? And all that stuff is not called out by CSC1. CSC1 doesn't mandate you and doesn't have checklist of this is how you check a primary low water cutoff. This is how you check a secondary low water cutoff. That's basically CSC1 says do it per the manufacturers, but the manufacturers have very little instruction as well. You know, they might say, oh, just blow down the water column and that's fine. But I've seen low water cutoffs that, you know, McDowell Miller 150 head, so it's going to be a float style low water cutoff. And when you blow it down, somebody cranks that ball valve open, and when you have, you know, 80 psi of steam, that steam rushes down from the top cross, the water rushes out from the boiler from the bottom cross, and all that flow forces that float down hard in the bowl, and the low water cutoff trips. But if you were to slowly lower the water level of the boiler, the float hangs up and has a hard spot in it. And what do boilers normally do when they are steaming? The water level slowly goes up and slowly goes down as the boiler fills and, you know, surges and whatnot. The water level slowly moves up and down. And if you were to run a boiler out of water, the float is not going to just rapidly empty when when you were opening the blowdown valve of the low water cutoff. That's a lot of force and flow over that float. The water level inside that float chamber is going to slowly drop. And if that float has a hard spot that it gets stuck on, it can hang up, and now it doesn't work. So even though you've been blowing it down every day and testing it, yup, on an annual test for a CSC1, I would always say you are doing an evaporation test, or, I also call it like a slow drain test, where basically you shut off the feed water to the boiler. If you don't have a load, typically you probably won't have a load depending on what's going on, but you slowly crack open the bottom blowdown valves, and you have the boiler firing in low fire, and you slowly drop the water level inside the boiler, and your primary should trip. So then you stop, and then, to do it correctly, you should probably bypass the primary. So you can bypass the primary if there's no indication that the secondary trips, but then you keep going down, restart the boiler, and then you keep going down, and it doesn't even need to be firing at this point, but it keeps going down, and then it could be a pre-purge, and then the secondary trips, and the boiler shuts down, and you want to make sure that you still have water in the sight glass. Probably you should be within an inch of the bottom of the sight glass when the secondary low water cutoff trips. And this is for a steam boiler, and like that's a good real world test that simulates real world conditions. It's a functional test. Now, if you were to jump out the primary low water cutoff, you're going to want to unjump that and then retest it before you mark off on your CSD1 that both floats work. So if you touch the wiring, I don't even care if it's just I just put a wire across two terminals. If you touch the wiring, you have to retest it. I don't care if you just tested it 2 minutes ago. You touch the wiring, you're retesting it. So then you fill the boiler back up, and then you slowly drop the water level down again. Primary trips, you're good. You make sure that the secondary low water cutoff requires a manual reset. The primary is probably going to be auto reset, but you are making sure that it functionally works. But you have to make sure that happens. Nobody else will. If you work with somebody else, say two people are working together and you're testing safety together, you have to hold each other responsible. If you're a more senior person working with a junior person, it is your responsibility to show them the correct way. Not what will work or a shortcut or, this will make it trip or this is what I do. What is the correct way? And if you don't know the correct way, ask your company. Your company should have some kind of standard of, hey, this is how we do things. This is how we want to check the high gas switch. This is how we want to check the low gas switch. And there should be a couple ways to check it. This is our preferred. If you cannot do this, this is how we want to test it. Going down the list. I understand that the manufacturers will write in the manual, how to test it and whatnot, but it is very, very general, and manufacturers, depending on the boiler manufacturer, you can order your steam boiler with as many or as little gadgets and gizmos as you want, and a boiler that's loaded with all the gadgets and gizmos is not going to have a more in-depth manual than one that's not. So that's something you have to keep in mind, but that goes back to training and having standards and procedures for this is the correct way we do it, and it will pay off eventually. You could do 20 years of CSD1 reports, safety checks on boilers, and all it takes is for one boiler to not get done correctly or skipped. You get complacent. We've done this so many times, whatever, everything works. You get complacent, and that boiler melts, and now you look dumb because you just did a CSD1 a week before, said everything worked, and then some inspector comes and they're like, well, the low water cutoff had water in the head and all the wires were rotted and there's corrosion. Like, that didn't happen in the last week. Why didn't you check that? Oh, well, all we did was just blow it down and it worked for us a week ago. I'm not going to say that you're going to be held liable, but you look dumb. As the qualified individual, as the boiler professional, the one your customers are paying $150 to $200+ an hour, you're the expert to go out there and say, this is what you need because this. Not, you need a new low water cutoff because we feel like it. It's, hey, you need a new low water cutoff because the wires are corroded, because the bellows are slowly leaking in the float chamber. So in the electrical component head, I took a picture of it. You have corrosion and you'll get a little bit of steam in here and that will ruin the low water cutoff. It still is functional now, but it's unsafe. We can't run the boiler. You need a new float. That's what I would want as an owner. And some owners might be like, well, let's just run it. As a boiler professional, you have to say, no, we're not running, you can't run your boiler with a bad low water cutoff that's failing, that has a leaky bellows that's leaking water, like that's like a dealership letting somebody drive away that has ball joints that are thin as a pencil. Like it should never be done. And there are some extremes of, I think people take some extremes of how much liability contractors actually like take on, and oh, we need to do this, we need to do this. There's a lot of idealism out there, but at a bare minimum, you need to over communicate and inform your customer about their boiler. And if they don't want to do something that you feel needs to be done, you write it up, you get signatures, you walk away, whatever. But your company should be able to handle that. But on a CSD1, never assume the information is correct. If it came from the manufacturer, if you have old reports, if you're filling out the report the first time, you are verifying everything. And if you don't verify it yourself, if you don't see it with your own eyes, if you don't touch it with your own hands, it didn't happen. It wasn't that number. You have safety valves. You may be able to take a picture of one tag and be like, yep, all three valves, all three safety valves look alike. So I got a picture of one tag. So that's good enough. No, you need to take a picture of all three tags. You have to make sure that all three tags are correct. You have to see and verify. This is the difference between companies that are great and companies that say they're great. You as the person have to care and have ownership over that boiler. I've said it before in previous podcasts, but you have to care and make the customer's problems your problems. Just because you leave the site and nobody says anything about your CSD1 report doesn't mean it doesn't matter. If you correctly fill out a CSD1 report, it's just to show other people, the state inspector, your insurance company, the customer, your back office. It's the report is just to show that you correctly verified that the boiler was correctly running and all the safety and controls worked at that time. The goal is not to fill out the report. The report is a product of you doing something. And if you copy information from old reports, or if you don't source information from correctly, like if you have three identical boilers and you find the information of one boiler and then you just copy that information across all three, like, oh, of course they're all the same MAWP. Oh, of course they're all the same capacity. Oh, of course all the safety valves are the same. Why wouldn't they be the same? That is where you run into problems. You have to look at every single boiler. Look at all three. But that conversation I had with that student today that took the course, I mean, it's a simple mistake. The manufacturer of the boiler engraved the wrong capacity into the data tag, but the safety valves were sized correctly. But manufacturer should have caught that. The state inspector should have caught that. And now his contractor caught it. They got it fixed. But that is why you check. That is why you trust but verify. Manufacturers don't make mistakes. All boiler manufacturers try to do their best. But that doesn't mean that they're perfect. You trust but verify. You look at their CSD1 report that the manufacturer sends and go, all right, that's nice information. Well, I'm going to look at the boiler myself, and I'm going to make sure that the boiler is correct and that all the information is correct. Because you are the qualified individual. You are the one signing the bottom of the report, and that's your signature on it, and that should mean something. When people see your signature, they should have confidence. When they see the signature, oh, Eric Johnson did that. Oh, yeah, I know that boiler's good. Yeah, he does stuff right. Yeah, he makes sure. He trusts and verifies. He does it by the book. If you get a reputation for not doing it by the book, cutting corners, whatnot, your signature means nothing, and that's your reputation. That's your brand. And that's a terrible brand and reputation to have if you are around boilers. Go do something else if you're going to cut corners and be lazy, because boilers and safety are no matter to have laziness and cutting corners. That is not what we need in the industry. There are plenty of other jobs you can go do. Go sell parts for boilers, but don't be the one that's saying, yep, this boiler's safe, and I'm going to put my signature at the bottom of this form because I checked all the safeties, but I didn't really. I just kind of cut corners, and I don't really know what I'm doing. I have no standards. The company didn't train me. I don't know. But I'm going to sign it, and that's all they want to see. Nobody even questions what I put on this report. Nobody even reads it, so why does it matter? Once again, the report is a byproduct of you checking the boiler. The report is not the goal. But always verify the information. If you get nothing else, always verify. Be curious. Look at the information and understand that everything is done by humans, manufacturers, inspectors, other contractors, you humans. And you should always double check information. Even if somebody says that, oh, this safety worked, you can check that off. You should double check if you're not confident that they know how to correctly do it or that you didn't see them do it. That is the same thing. They preach that all the time with lockout, tag out with electrical. Somebody says, yep, electricity's off. I turn the 480 off. You're good to go. Panel's dead. I locked it out. You're good to go. You work with that person every day. They have no reason to lie to you. You know, some people may have bad intentions, but this person has no reason to lie to you and thinks they turned it off. You are taking their word that they turned it off, and you are putting your life in their hands that they turned it off, and now you touch the 480 and it's still on. Boom. You're shocked. You know, may you live, may you die, whatever. That person will never forgive themselves, but that is why somebody says, hey, I turned off the electrical, you're good to go. You're like, hey, great, thank you. I still got my meter. I'm going to verify that before we get into that panel. I trust you, but I'm going to verify that. Well, they probably turned off the electrical 99.9% of the time. You could work 20 years with somebody and you get into routine. Yep, I turned off the electrical. You're good to go. I checked it. You're good to go. Get in there. Never take somebody else's word for that the electrical is off. Oh, there's no power. Oh, there's no pressure on that. You need to verify for yourself when that comes to safety. And you get complacent. You start cutting corners. And it hasn't happened before, so it won't happen to me. And now you touch 480, you die, and your work buddy can't live with himself for the rest of time because now he blames himself for you dying because he told you that the power was off and it somehow wasn't off. His meter wasn't working, whatnot. You guys skipped the procedure. And now you're dead, and now he has to live the rest of his life with that pit in his stomach, knowing that he killed you and is responsible for your death. Like that, I wish that upon nobody. And that is why it is so important, especially with boilers, especially with electricity, when you are working with pressure, with energy, that you are checking safeties. You are checking all the controls. You are making sure it is correct. Does your company have a way to do something? How does your company approach this problem? How does your company approach that problem? It should not just be like, oh, go figure it out. I don't know. What does the manual say? Like at a base level, you should have some kind of standardization across your organization of this is how we enter boiler rooms. This is how we do our mental safety checks of making sure that the boiler's safe. If it's a steam boiler, this is how we check the safeties on it in general. These are all generalizations. If you have no greater instruction, refer back to these generalization procedures. If the manufacturer has specific instructions on how to do something, great, go do that. But what if you're working on a 1970 boiler with some burner that's no manual, no electrical diagram? All right, how are we going about checking that? You don't have any manufacturer information. What are you doing? How do you check the low water cutoffs? How do you check the high gas? How do you check the air switch? What's the proper procedure? And that's, I go over examples of that in the Foundations of Controls and Safety Devices course. And even boilers that are bigger than 12.5 million BTUs and are not CSD1, they all have safeties and controls, and it's how do you test those? And a lot of the procedures, whether it's a small boiler, big boiler, a lot of them can be the same. And you want to make sure that you know what you're doing as a company, have some kind of generalized standard. And I provide that, at least for CSU1, with my field guide. It's one of the downloads. And that download you can reference. It's a step-by-step field guide on how to fill out a CSU1 report in the field. And instead of somebody standing over a younger person I wouldn't say younger, but a newer person, instead of somebody older who is more experienced standing over a less experienced person and showing them, hey, this is what you do, this is what you do here, this is what you do here, that can be problematic because on-the-job training, it's normally for just one situation, and the person on-the-job training, like if you're still completing a job and it's not just screwing around all day of, hey, let's show up to this site and we're just gonna train, that's very rare. Most on-the-job training is, hey, we're doing billable work, but we're gonna teach you along the way. And that's not always the greatest learning atmosphere. And if you have no base, if you have no foundation for CSD1, now you get handed this clipboard by a person more experienced than you, and they just say, hey, fill it out. And you're like, shoot, how do I fill this out? Where do I even start? Look at all these pieces of information. Where am I even going with this? All right, manufacturer. Let's see, is that burner manufacturer? Is that me? Am I a manufacturer? Is that the boiler manufacturer? Is it the sticker on the side of the boiler? How do I determine who manufactured the boiler? That is all covered in the Foundations of Controls and Safety Devices course. That is all also, I would say it's like Cliff Notes on the field guide. It is each step of how to fill out the report, Cliff Notes style, so that you don't have to go back and rewatch the videos and lessons. And, while it's good to do that to get the proper information, I've been in the boiler room, and sometimes you just need to reference something quick. And I know 100% of the time you're not going to open up a course and go into a video and rewatch something. That's not practical. You're going to reference the field guide. You're going to reference how to do a bubble leak test guide. You are going to, reference the precaution statement and what all is involved with that. That is how things work that is what you should have when you are learning and training people, not just one person showing them and then assuming that they understand it. And it all relies on the quality of your trainer. And while there are great, well-intentioned people out there, telling somebody once about something does not teach them. And especially if they only see it in one situation. Because now what if the low gas switch changes position? What if you don't even have a low gas pressure switch? What if it's a hydronic boiler and you don't have a secondary low water cutoff? What do I do? More experienced person would be like, oh, you don't check it. You don't mark it off on the CSD1. Like, yeah, you don't have a secondary low water cutoff. A newer person is going to be searching for a secondary low water cutoff because they were told on the steam boiler that you did on the job training with that, we always have 2 secondary low water cutoffs on these, Scotch Marine boilers. So you always need to check the primary and you always need to check the secondary. Well, what can happen with a newer person checking out a smaller hydronic boiler is they can find the primary and they go, man, where's the secondary? So they look around, and they'll do 2 things. They'll either have to call somebody, so now they're bothering somebody else, which is fine. There's tons of people that want to help, but it's not efficient to constantly have to call people. It also can create a bad habit where people end up calling for help before they've actually thought about the problem, but that's for another day. Or 2, they go, well, they told me that every boiler has 2 lower cutoffs, so it must be here somewhere. I'm sure it works. I'm just going to check it off. And now you checked off a secondary low water cutoff on a small hydronic boiler, and the boiler doesn't have a secondary low water cutoff. And now you're just making up information. And now if somebody actually looks at the CSD1 report, they go, like, I know that boiler doesn't have a secondary low water cutoff. This is made up. Like, how'd you test that? And then the person goes, oh, I don't know. I couldn't find it, so I just checked it off. Now you have bad information, and you got to throw the whole report out technically, because how do you trust anything else if somebody's just making up information? And because they value completing the CSD1 report over the proper testing of the boiler and knowing how to test the boiler. I'm not saying that my Foundations of Controls and Safety Devices training course it doesn't teach everything about CSD1. It is taught from a contractor's perspective of somebody out in the field that has an installed boiler that the manufacturer made sure is CSD1 compliant. You will get a baseline. You will get the foundational materials. You're jumping into the puddle of CSD1. There is so much to know about CSD1, even though, it's a pretty short standard. And so many people, they don't work with it every day. So you're not going to know everything, but you have to get that foundation where you feel comfortable with it. You feel comfortable with the report. You feel comfortable with the information. You feel comfortable with what the standard says. And then you can always reference it. You reference the, boiler and CSD1 field guide that's from the course. You can go back and reference the lesson videos. You reference the actual CSD1 standard and what it says when you have specific questions. There is knowledge you need to know, and then there is knowledge that's referenceable. Memorizing all the requirements of the CSD1 standard and memorizing the standard, that is unnecessary. You can go about and do that if you want. You're going to find out if you do that 6 months later, and you're probably going to forget a ton of it, and you're probably going to get confused, and you're still going to have to reference it. A good field person working with boilers has a good foundation of knowledge, and then they have the tools to reference information. How do I get the information I need at this point in time? And that's what the field guide is meant for you. It's 75 steps, I believe, of information of how to complete a field report correctly for a CSD1 form, and all the requirements, the precaution statement, what a qualified individual is, getting an owner's signature, how to go over the annual maintenance, who's doing that, making sure you're training the owner correctly. And there's a lot that goes into it. If you don't have a standard for that, I highly recommend it. And that's my plug. But with anything you do, trust but verify. Never assume. You have to see it for yourself. You have to touch it for yourself. Even if somebody tells you information that's critical, like, hey, that safety works, I tested it. All right, that's cool. Well, my signature is going at the bottom of the report, so let me just check it again. Like I didn't see you test it. That was earlier this morning. I showed up later. Now we're doing it. Like, let's check it again. It only takes a couple minutes. Like that's all that requires. Like, it's not hard, but it takes somebody who cares, who makes the customer's problem their problem, and who slows down and says, all right, like, this is serious. Like, one, all like boilers are safe, mechanical rooms are like there is a level of safety to it, but it's only because I determine that it's safe and I am the expert. The customer is paying me or paying my company, $200 an hour for me to be here, and they're trusting me to do it correctly. Like, you have to, like, if you were to hire somebody and they're saying, all right, it's going to be $1,500 for me to come out, like, you would be like, all right, like, send a good person. Like, what kind of training you got? Like, are you going to do it correctly? And if they just come out and say, yep, everything's good, and here's a form, and the form is half filled out, and you can't read any of the information, and it's smeared and it has coffee stains on it, are you going to feel amazing about $1,500? No. But if you come out and you're like, man, that professional, like, that guy from that company or that girl from that company, they're a professional. They really knew what they were doing. They understood my questions. I even had a question that they didn't know, and they said, I don't know, but I'll find out for you. And 3 hours later, they came back to me and said, hey, I talked to my manager or whatever. I emailed the manufacturer. They got back to me. This is the answer to your question. Like, that is what separates good to great. And great people, great boiler service professionals, great boiler operators are the ones who care and have ownership over the equipment. And if you can't get to that level, and if you show up and just think it's a job, clock your 8 hours and clock out, and you don't care at any level, go find something else to do. You're going to hurt yourself, or you're going to hurt other people eventually. There are plenty of other jobs working around boilers. If you can't bring yourself enough to care to do things at least semi-correctly on a daily basis, go do something else. But that's my plug for the Foundations of Controls and Safety Devices learning course. You can find it on boilerin.com. DM me on LinkedIn, email me if you have any questions. If you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. I've talked about LinkedIn enough on this podcast. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. With anything, I don't even care if you buy my training, buy somebody else's training, whatever. Get yourself trained up, talk with other people around you, talk with people in your company, and make sure you're on the same page. Put some procedures together and learn from the people with experience, and make sure it's not somebody's opinion, and that it's actually like, yeah, that's correct information, and you will be better. So that's all I got today. Episode 25 of the Boiler Wild podcast. We are still rolling with this. We'll be rolling for a while. I don't plan on quitting. I started. I ain't quitting. I ain't ever leaving. So thank you for listening. If you got this far, please rate the podcast 5 stars. That would be amazing to me. I really appreciate it. It takes 30 seconds. Just rate it on your podcast platform, Spotify or Apple, whatever. But I would really appreciate that. Thank you, and stay wild.